I call the Minister.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Terrorism Legislation Amendment Police Powers and Parole Bill 2017. This bill will add yet another layer to our already comprehensive counter-terrorism measures by ensuring the New South Wales Police Force has appropriate powers and legal protections when responding to acts of terrorism, and by amending the Crimes Administration of Sentences Act 1999 to introduce the presumption against parole for terrorism-related offenders. Mr Acting Speaker, can I just pause at this point and congratulate the New South Wales Police on their response to the Link Cafe incident. Can I also ask the House to always be mindful of the work of the police and our Australian Defence Force personnel who are fighting terrorism both here and overseas. They do a terrific job. This bill makes important amendments to two pieces of legislation. The first is the Terrorism Police Powers Act 2002. The horrendous events of the Link Cafe siege on Monday, the 15th of December 2014, and the early hours of 16 December will forever be etched into the collective memory of New South Wales and Australia. Terror arrived at our doorsteps that day, and ultimately 2 innocent people lost their lives. The deaths of Tory Johnson and Katrina Dawson affected us all. The grief their families and their friends have endured is immeasurable. Following the siege, the State Coroner conducted a very thorough examination of the events surrounding the siege and the New South Wales Police Force response to that siege and the events surrounding the tragic conclusion of the siege. The Coroner found the sole blame for the events of that day rests with the deceased lone wolf terrorists. However, lessons can be learnt from the siege, and the bill clarifies the law to protect certainty for police who need to use force, including lethal force, against terrorists by amending the Terrorism Police Powers Act 2002 to introduce a new Part 2 AAA into the Act. Under the new Section 24A, the Commissioner of Police has the power to make a declaration where satisfied an incident police are responding to is, or likely to be, a terrorism act, and the planned and coordinated police action is required to defend people threatened by the Terrorist Act or to terminate their unlawful deprivation of liberty. The declaration may be made in respect to the specified location in which police officers are responding and any other specified location. The Commissioner is to inform the police officer in charge that a declaration has been made. The Commissioner must also notify the Minister for Police either before or as soon as practical after a declaration is made. If the Commissioner is not available, a Deputy Commissioner may make such a declaration. A declaration can be made orally or in writing. However, where a declaration is made orally, it must be confirmed in writing as soon as it is practical to do so. The Commissioner may at any time revoke a declaration and must do so if no further police response is required at the location concerned. The bill also inserts Section 24B into the Act. Under Section 24B, where a declaration is made, the police action that is authorised in responding to the Terrorist Act is authorising, directing or using force, including lethal force, that is reasonably necessary in the circumstances as the police officer perceives them, and to defend persons threatened by the incident or prevent or terminate their unlawful deprivation of liberty. Where a police officer takes such police action for the purposes of the police action plan of the police officer in charge, that police officer will not incur criminal liability where they act in good faith. It is important to note that police officers that act in good faith in reliance on the Commissioner's declaration will still be protected from criminal liability even if that declaration is later found to be invalid or indeed is revoked. The protection will remain until the police officer either becomes aware of any revocation or when the police officer acting reasonably ought to have been aware of the revocation. The second piece of legislation being amended is the Crimes Administration of Sentences Act 1999. The New South Wales Act has strong parole laws, and what we are doing today is introducing a bill that builds on this position. As the co-ed communique of the 9th of June 2017, New South Wales took the lead in proposing a presumption against parole for any person who has demonstrated support for or links to terrorist activity. This bill gives full effect to this proposal and consolidates on the government's recent announcement compelling the State Parole Authority to consider the offender's terrorist links and associations when making parole decisions. The amendments establish new provisions that will apply to the new category of a terrorism-related offender. A terrorism-related offender is broadly defined to include any offender serving a sentence for a terrorism offence who has previously been convicted of a terrorism offence or who has been charged with a terrorism offence. It also encompasses offenders subject to a control order made under Part 5.3 of the Commonwealth Criminal Code, those with any associations with a terrorist organisation, those who have advocated terrorist acts, and those who have associations or affiliations with supporters of terrorist acts or violent extremism. The new provisions mean that the State Parole Authority must not release an offender who is known to the authority to be a terrorism-related offender unless it is satisfied that the offender will not engage in or incite or assist others to engage in terrorist acts or violent extremism. Mr Acting Speaker, we cannot afford to take any chances when it comes to dealing with terrorists or those capable of carrying out terrorist acts or inciting violent extremism. For this reason, the bill imposes a very high threshold that the State Parole Authority must satisfy. To guide the State Parole Authority's decision-making, the new Section 159D introduces two general provisions. One, the State Parole Authority is to have regard to credible information. This section empowers the authority to consider the source of the evidence and the risk posed by the offender and account for the possible conditions of any potential parole order. And two, when considering the nature of any associations or affiliations that the offender has any previous or groups advocating support for terrorist acts or violent extremism, the State Parole Authority must have regard to whether such an association gives rise to any such risk. The provision aims to ensure that the presumption against parole does not inadvertently extend to those who may have a familial or coincidental relationship with a person or group, but who themselves do not share or espouse such views. The amendments also allows the State Parole Authority or a judicial member to revoke the parole order of a terrorism-related offender if they are made aware that the offender may engage in, incite or assist others to engage in terrorist acts or violent extremism. This low threshold will enable the State Parole Authority to take protective rather than reactive action to ensure that dangerous offenders are kept in prison and away from the community. Mr Acting Speaker, this government recognises that our approach to counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism must take a whole-of-government approach and a community approach as well. These amendments certainly build on a number of initiatives already taken by the government. This government has already committed $47 million over the next 3 years to combat violent extremism in the prison system by enhancing both security and capacity. This includes a new high-security unit at Golden Correctional Centre, upgrading the existing Supermax, improving intelligence gathering and establishing a dedicated counter-terrorism unit that will monitor the increasing number of inmates on terrorism offences. Corrective Services New South Wales plays an integral role in countering violent extremism, and the government's recent investment affirms our commitment to keep our community safe. The government is continuing to work with the Commonwealth to implement the continued detention of high-risk terror offenders scheme. This will ensure that where there is unacceptable risk to the community at the expiry of their sentence, there are options to keep them in detention. We continue to support the New South Wales Police Force with improved equipment, training and exercise, which the budget handed down only yesterday. Protecting our community is not just a task for law enforcement. To counter and prevent violent extremism, we need to work in partnership with schools, health professionals, sporting groups, multicultural communities and the private sector and, of course, families. This is a shared responsibility for all of us. Mr Acting Speaker, through this bill, the government continues to ensure our counter-terrorism measures are some of the strongest in the world, and with that in mind, I commend the bill to the House.
Hear, hear.